Okay, so I'd like to welcome all of you to this class. And we're not going to meet next week because it's much too close to Passover. And I'll get in touch with you when we will be meeting later. And as I said earlier, we're going to be talking about Goliath now. So let me share with you the, okay. I actually refreshed my pictures today and found some pictures that you may not have seen in the past, which when I've taught this particular class. So this actually is on the Sistine Chapel. Would you believe it?
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
David and Goliath.
Yeah.
Goliath seems to be blonde here and has very short hair, which is interesting. But look how muscular he is, and David is very small and he's straddling him. So I mean, his feet are over here, and that's only and here's the top of his body. I mean, he's really is a giant. I mean, he wants to really get that in there. So that's very interesting. And this presumably is where he keeps his slingshots, right? This is the little box for his sling. So I mean, it's pretty close to the biblical story. Where are we geographically? We are geographically here in the valley of Elah, which is near Gat, Azekah. To give you, those of you in Israel, this will probably mean more to you. Here's Beit Shemesh up here. Here's Gedera. All right, and here's the valley of Elah. So about 45 minutes from us, I guess, something like that, from the Negev. All right. So the first question we right away ask is who killed Goliath? If I ask you, you'll tell me what?
David.
David. Yeah, of course, we all know that. Okay, so we're going to see here that there's three different versions of who killed Goliath. And the first one is that the person who killed Goliath was Elchanan, son of Yareh or Agim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath, the Gittite. Okay, so this is in 2 Samuel 21. All right, war broke out between the Philistines, and David and the men with him went down and fought. David grew weary. All right, somebody tried to kill David. Ishbi-Nabab tried to kill David. All right, and he was a descendant of the Roiphe, and the Roiphe is probably a giant, right? And his spear, his bronze spear, weighed 300 shekels. He wore new armor. Okay, Avishai, son of Zeruiah, came to his aid. Whose aid? David's, right? And killed him. And it was then that David's man declared to him on oath, "You shall not go with us into battle anymore, yet lest you extinguish the lamp of Israel." So in other words, David is already being referred to as the lamp of Israel, right? Or maybe it referred to all of Israel, right? But in other words, David's men realized that he was not capable of continuing. And then the fight breaks out and there's fighting, and Elchanan killed Goliath, all right? Okay. And then again, there was more fighting at Gath. There was a giant of a man, Ish, it says Midon here, but it's probably Ish Midot, I imagine, but I'm not sure, who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all, all right? He too was descended from the Roiphe, from the giant family. When he taught, and remember the name Roiphe because it's going to come up later in connection with someone, right? When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, the son of David's brother, Shimei, killed him. Jonathan killed him. These 4, okay, were descended from the Roiphe, and they fell by the hands of David and his men. Okay, so David had a crew, but he did not kill anyone. Okay, this may come to you as a shock. Of course, right? You can't see it because it's very small here. I'll make it very, very big. Of course. Rashi has an explanation. Of course, David and Elchanan were one and the same person. Okay, we solved everything. Not to worry, right? Okay. But notice how they're sort of scaring you with the 6 fingers and 6 toes. It has a little bit of, okay, so this is one source. All right. Now, this is before we look at the next source. So you also have here in a review of Devers has archaeology buried the Bible. It says, he says to him, the consequences are clear. David against Goliath is a legend, all right? And he refers to this, he refers to all of this, all right? And he has what he has to say about it. If any of you are interested, you could find the article. It's a review of Devers as archaeology, okay? So one of the things he's showing as far as an archaeologist is that Azekah was not settled at all in the days of David, all right? So there's a gap, all right? So in gap of occupation for a long time. And so in contrast to 1 Samuel 17:1, which we have not read yet, right? We have not read that yet, right? What we read was 2 Samuel 21, okay? In contrast to what we're going to read, there was no Azekah in the days of David, okay? So let's go on. Now we have the text from 1 Samuel. And here we're going to read quite a bit of it, all right? Because it's important for us to get the background here. So I'll have some of you read, and so let's start. I see some more people have joined us, very nice. So let's start with Norman. Let's start with you reading the text from 1 Samuel. And I already am pushing you to pay attention to Goliath's suggestion, all right? Goliath's suggestion, which could prevent mass killing. Okay, so would you like to read? I might stop you in the middle.
The Philistines assembled their forces for battle. They massed at Soka of Judah and encamped at Ephes Damim between Soka and Azekah. Saul and the men of Israel massed and encamped in the valley of Elah. They drew up their line of battle against the Philistines, with the Philistines stationed on one hill and Israel stationed on the opposite hill. The ravine was between them. The champion of the Philistine forces stepped forward. His name was Goliath of Gath, and he was 6 cubits and a span tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a breastplate of scale armor, a bronze breastplate weighing 5,000 shekels. He had bronze greaves on his legs and a bronze javelin slung from his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was like a weaver's bar, and the iron head of his spear weighed 600 shekels, and the shield bearer marched in front of him. He stopped and called out to the ranks of Israel, and he said to them, "Why should you come out to engage in battle? I am the Philistine champion, and you are Saul's servants. Choose one of your men and let him come down against me. If he bests me in combat and kills me, we will become your slaves. But if I best him and kill him, you shall be our slaves and serve us." And the Philistine ended, "I herewith defy the ranks of Israel. Get me a man and let's fight it out." When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and terror-stricken. The Philistine stepped forward morning and evening and took his stand for 40 days.
Okay, so what do we learn from this? Right?
That he was a giant.
Okay, what else?
And
What
very
else?
strong.
Very strong, okay.
And that this was a protracted thing. It wasn't just a little one-day thing. It's 40 days.
But what took the 40 days?
40 days that he comes every day and challenges them.
Okay, in other words, but no fighting is happening during these 40 days.
Nothing.
Right.
Nothing's happening. It's like, people are,
The Israelites can't make up their mind, so they're not giving a response.
exactly. All right, does that sound familiar?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Sadly so.
okay, so in other words, had they made up their minds, had they sent some representative, okay. So now, next morning, David sends someone, right? And so this is a story we know. right? He left his flock behind him, and he gets to the army, and he leaves his baggage, and he's, looks to, goes to look at what's going on. He sees his brothers, he talks to them, and then while he was talking to them, Goliath steps forward and spoke the same words as before during these 40 days, or maybe at the end of 40 days, maybe it's on the 40th day or the 41st day. David hears him, right? This is verse 23. And when the men of Israel saw the man, they fled in terror. They weren't fleeing in terror before, right? And this in itself is strange. It's a little bit different than what we saw earlier. So there seems to be some, it's true, I'm not giving you every, let's see, what was the previous? The previous was 16, verse 16, but it doesn't really matter. I only deleted 4 verses, but there's okay. And what happens, and like the fairy tale, right? The man who kills him will be rewarded. There's a rumor going around, right? Whoever kills him will be rewarded by the king, right? It's like, a fairy tale. He'll give him his daughter in marriage, and he'll grant exemption to his father's house in Israel. In other words, maybe he won't have to pay taxes. He won't have to work. They probably had to give a military service, right? It wouldn't have to be in the Milouim. No taxes, no work, like the corvée in France, required work. And David says, what will be done? This sounds like, what does it say? What will be done for the man who kills that Philistine and removes the disgrace from Israel? What does that sound like? There's an echo there. No one else hears the same thing that I hear? To me, it sounds a little bit like Haman and, Haman and Mordecai with the horse and everything. All right, it doesn't matter. I don't think it's relevant, and we'd have to look at the Hebrew to check it out to see if that echo is a good echo. It might not be a good echo. Anyway, who is that uncircumcised Philistine that he dares defy the ranks of the living God? All of a sudden, David is talking about God here. Isn't that interesting? Right? And they told him what would happen. Okay, go on. And David, the things that David heard, Saul hears about it. He says, okay, come here. And David tells Saul about himself, gives him a little biography, how he saves animals and rescued them from lions, right? He's killed lions and bears. He's exaggerated a little bit. And he brags, right? He brags, that uncircumcised Philistine shall end up like one of them, for he has defied the ranks of the living God. By the way, is this the same David who has been playing the harp and soothing the breath of King Saul? Is this the same David, right? And if it is the same David, how come Saul doesn't know who he is? That's another problem. Okay, we're not going to go there because we're not that interested today. But it is when I taught the book, we discussed this a lot. Okay. Saul gives David his own garments. You just imagine David's this little guy. Saul gives him his clothes, and he takes them off because it's just not for him. And he takes a stick, stone, sling. We know that. We know it's a story we know. All right. Meanwhile, the Philistine is coming closer. And what does the Philistine say to him? First of all, he sees him. He's insulted. He's this big giant, and he sees this midget. Well, actually, it's not politically correct to say midget. He says this small little guy, young guy, right? He's insulted, and he says, am I a dog that you come against me with sticks? You almost feel sorry for the Philistine, right? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And he says to him, come here, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. Just imagine the big, strong voice. And David replies and tells him, you come with me, and I have God on my side, right? And God is going to deliver you to me. I'm going to kill you, cut your head off. I'm going to give you the carcass. It's very cruel what he's saying. But this young boy, the way he's speaking is awful. If you think about it, I'm going to kill you, cut off your head, give the carcasses of the Philistine camp to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the earth, right? And everyone will know there's a God in Israel. So he's making this speech, to show, first of all, that he's, it's very braggadocio, is that how you pronounce that word? And very, very full of bragging. And he also takes God's name. And this is God's battle, all right? So, of course, religious people love this speech. Okay. Now, we have the battle, the sling stones. We know that the stone sank in his forehead. He fell face down on the ground. Thus, David bested the Philistine with sling and stone. He struck him down and killed him. David didn't have a sword, so what does he do? He takes the Philistine sword, cuts it, takes it from the sheath, and cuts off his head. All right? And what happens? Now, when the Philistines saw their warrior was dead, they ran. And now all the brave, in quotation marks, the brave men of Israel now rise up with a war cry. They pursue them, they kill a whole bunch of them, and then they return and they loot their camp. And David takes the head and brings it to Jerusalem, and he puts the weapons in his own tent. Okay, so this is the story that we know. The story we did not know, right? The story we did not know was the original, not the original, but the later story where we have a different version. It happens much later, and all of a sudden we have Goliath appearing again. All right, okay, we can always, explain anything away as Rashi does. Anyway, before we go on, let's look at some pictures. Having read this story, right? I sort of tried to make some chronological order here. So I put this one first because here we have David giving thanks to God. In other words, it wasn't David who did it, it was God who did it, right? By the way, when we learned the story as children, I don't think there was a God in there, right? It was David, right? It was David with his stones. It was a small little
With
God.
his slingshot.
Right. By the way, I think when I last taught this, was it you, Norman, who pointed out that Goliath might have had some eye disease?
Yeah, that was from the Malcolm Gladwell book.
Right. Okay. I didn't remember if that was from the Galilee. So I have the Gladwell here, so we'll see that in a minute. Okay. We'll come to that in a minute. That sort of takes away from the story, right? Here's another one, right? Here's another one. Notice the phallic symbol of Goliath, right? You can't miss it. And here is the Malcolm, the review of Gladwell's book, David and Goliath, Underdogs, Misfits, and the Art of Battling Giants. Why did I put down here October 7th? I have no idea why I inserted the word October 7th here. Maybe in connection with the Hamas. The moral is that weakness encourages innovation, right? Maybe that's it. Or being a big fish in a little pond instead of being a little fish in a big pond. This is the review. But anyway, what I underlined here was that David and Goliath sets out to exploit just two ideas. The first is that there is greatness and beauty in David-Goliath fights, at least when the underdog wins. The second is that we consistently get these kinds of conflicts wrong by failing to realize that giants have weaknesses and that underdogs can accomplish the unexpected. If David and Goliath were a more serious book, it would have to apply that thought to terrorism. That's why I wrote here October 7th. Okay. I taught this a year ago, so I think almost exactly a year. So the October 7th really belongs over here. All right, so this was Shannon. But this is what Norman had sent me originally. And here's, I'll make it a little bit bigger, all right? So that what Gladwell says is that Goliath probably had a serious medical condition, all right? Acromegaly,
yes.
A disease caused by a benign tumor of the pituitary gland, right? Which would explain his extraordinary size and one of the common side effects of acromegaly is vision problems, okay? So that's why Goliath was led out by an attendant. Here's his attendant over here, see? I think, I'm not sure, but there are other pictures where he's, but in the Bible story, he is led out with an attendant, all right? And David, right? David, when he tells Saul that he has killed bears and lions, right? He makes the point to Saul that he's going to fight Goliath the same way he has learned to fight wild animals, right? Which is why Goliath is so insulted when he sees him coming out with sticks and stones, right? One of the ballistic experts with the IDF showed that a typical size stone hurled by an expert slinger would have hit Goliath's head with a velocity of 34 meters per second, more than enough to penetrate his skull and render him unconscious or dead. Okay, which he said is fair size, equivalent to a fair size modern handgun. This is really fascinating if you think about it. Okay, so here's a few more pictures. This is Peter Paul Rubens. Look at this one. Look at this.
Mhm.
Now this is also very interesting because
David's pretty buff.
right,
He's packing there.
right. The only sense of disproportion is look how small his foot is on top of this very big head, right? Yeah, this is really
Bloody.
here's another one.
Bloody.
Wait, is somebody who have to mute somebody? Who do I have to mute? Okay, so not sure who I have to mute. Okay, so here again, you have the head and the body, and the body here almost looks, at least to me, what does the body look like here?
Dead.
Besides dead,
Like an animal.
like an animal, right? It looks like, right? It looks like some
horns there.
right?
It looks like the scales of a snake.
Right. It's very, very, demonizing of him. Yeah. Okay. Here's another one. David with the head of Goliath.
Oh.
Again, he looks pretty strong here. Look how big the head is in comparison to David. Here's David with Goliath's head in Germany, in the Schwerin Castle. This one I really like, and I spent a lot of time, I must tell you, I spent a lot of time looking for who wrote it. Because where I found it originally, there was no attribution. So I looked and looked and looked and looked, and I finally found it today. I spent a lot of time looking for it. And it turns out it's 16th century, right? Why I liked it was you have two friends strolling together casually, right? They're just going for a walk. And, instead of a pocketbook, he's carrying a head. And it's almost, right, look at the head. It's almost, it's almost, right? It's almost like laughing. I mean, it's a very weird picture, right? And I was able to find it, not the first time I looked, when I decided that this was Jonathan and David, I then inserted in my search, Jonathan, David, and Goliath's head. And then I found it. But the first time when I just put in David and Goliath, I didn't find it. Isn't this a funny picture? Not funny, but it's like the height of, and by the way, this article, this picture appears unattributed in a Christian, the Christian journal, is talking about the love between, not physical love, but the love relationship between Jonathan and
David.
right. And they're just walking casually, shooting the breeze. So, okay.
It's interesting how he's holding the sword.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, right, you're right. He's holding it by the opposite way.
But the head is like, here's a head.
It's so casual, right? It's so casual. And we don't know anything about the background of the painting, right? However, the commentary here is that you very rarely see David and Jonathan together. And so there's also spatial depth here, and there's a description here that the blue in the distance, the trees, which should be green in the distance, are blue. The blue seems to be very, there's the river. It's a really interesting picture. And here's I found it a second time, and so this is a little bit more somber. But the first one is the one that caught my eye originally. Okay, now we come to the Midrash. Okay, the Midrash is by Anne Roiphe or Roiphe. She's probably from being a doctor's daughter or something. I don't know. I think she's still alive, as far as I know. I've read a lot of her books. Years ago, she wrote Loving Kindness. Did any of you ever read that? That was about Choseret B'Tshuva and her mother's relationship from New York with her daughter who goes to Israel. And she's written a lot of very, very interesting books. And I think she was best known in the early days for Up the Sandbox, which I think came out in the anyway, anything she writes is worthwhile reading. And she wrote a book, 1185 Park Avenue, a memoir. Those of you in New York who live on the Upper East Side, you may even know her personally. I mean, I never met her personally. But anyway, when I read it, for me, it was like going back to my hometown. Anyway, she wrote a very interesting midrash. I call it a midrash. I don't know if she would call it a midrash, but it's based on the background that David is a descendant of Ruth, which we all know, and Goliath is a descendant of her sister Orpah. And the midrash, we're not going to look at the midrashim today, but the midrashim base it on, if you remember the first story, which I said, remember Rapha? Right? They managed to make a connection with the giants, that they're all descended from Rapha, which is like Orpah, right? That's a real stretch, but of course Midrash says that all the time. And that's why he is the descendant of Orpah, okay? So this is called a requiem for Goliath. The Philistine giant also had a mother. Okay, so you could already imagine how this story is going to go. Let's just see how many readers do we need. It's fairly short. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, each one is very short. So, okay, so Joyce, reader 1, Steve,
Okay.
reader 2, Norman, reader 3, Susan, reader 4, Francine, do you want to read? Reader 5, Barbara 6, Sue 7, Geraldine 8, Toby 9, and Lita, do you want to read? No. Okay, so you're at 9, so Toby read 9 and 10, okay?
Is this the first page here?
Yes.
Who mourns for Goliath? There he is, long legs, akimbo, head in the dirt, bugs crawling on his lips. The club that was intended for his enemy's head lies a few feet away, where his arm had flung it in a last gesture of defiance. In the trees at the side of the field, the crows and the sparrows, the bees and the grasshoppers are singing out the word to all God's creation. One, win, kill. One, win, kill. caw, cackle, trill. The field trembles with the sound of surprise.
Who's the second reader?
I think I am.
Yes.
The boy, not yet a man, but with broad shoulders and a set to his jaw that promised success, stood above his victim and felt a peculiar lightness in his head. How close he had come to death. It made the hand that clutched his slingshot tremble. God had been with him, but had he deserved the favor? Maybe yes, maybe no. The Jews came up beside him, cheering, and lifted him up on their shoulders. Still a boy, a golden boy. He smiled and waved at the Jewish army arrayed across the field. But he worried. What next? What else? The smell of blood was in the air. The hum of insects flying here and there, back and forth, was incessant. Victory was his, belonged to the Jews for now. But what next? What would it be? What would it be? When would it be his turn to lie in the grass, blood staining the dirt, breath fading away? Thou shalt not kill, said the Lord, but he didn't mean it, did he?
The Jews embraced David, and the king himself kissed him on both cheeks. David blushed with pleasure or shame or both. And the days of Goliath had ended, and the story of David had begun. It had begun in blood, it had begun in battle. And when desire struck, it would continue in deceit and lust and harm and death. Goliath's mother wept over the body of her child, her enormous child. We could create a river that would circle the globe with the tears of mothers. That river would grow so deep, flood the plains, lap at the peaks of mountains, that history itself might drown in its embrace.
We won't go
We
to
won't
war.
go to war no more, no more, sang the children around the campfire, their marshmallows charred and glowing on long sticks. But it wasn't up to them. A few yards further into the wood, an owl swooped down and sank his claws into the back of the small skull of a weasel, whose death would go unremarked by kith or kin, unnoticed by man or woman, by dog or fox, by star or moon. Did someone bury Goliath? Or was he left to decompose in the heat of the summer or the chill of wind and rain?
Before the
Susan, you wanna
rock
go
came
ahead?
through the. I was supposed to be 4. I don't know.
Yeah.
Should I go?
Yes.
Before the rock came through the air and ripped through the bones of Goliath's skull, had he known love? Before that, had he caressed a big girl with the smell of grass on her skin? Is there a way we can give him back his life, write an opera about him, compose a symphony in his honor, open a school with his name carved in stone above the doors? Of course not.
We could make up a birthday for Goliath and give each other presents of cookies and cakes, giant ones, to mark his death every year. But we won't. The defeated don't get cookies and cake. The winner of the battle celebrates, and the loser waits his turn for revenge. And so it will go until the end of time.
Animals who have long, sharp teeth pierce the skin of their enemies. Animals with poison in their glands destroy their enemies with a quick snap of their jaws. Animals who slither, crawl, or jump from high rocks kill because they do not like vegetables. They run fast, dive low, soar up, swim wide rivers, sun themselves on boulders, and sleep in dark caves or high up on tree limbs. Man is foe and prey, and we are left to wonder why the warm earth, the plains, the mountains, the rivers, and the oceans were designed so that the weeping of creatures would echo in the sky and the prospect of a blood-stained death would stalk us all.
And so when the rock from David's slingshot pierced Goliath's brow, did anyone on the battlefield understand that Jews would pay a price for this victory and subsequent defeats? Was God pleased, or was he ashamed of his creation? Or had he moved on to another planet, galaxies away, leaving us to our own devices, which became elaborate enough to destroy the very ground beneath our feet, making us not only the enemy of the tribe next door, but the destroyer of life itself, of every living thing?
What if David had sat down on the grass in the middle of the field and told Goliath stories about the beginning of time, the names of the stars, the paths of birds, the games of children? What if David had told Goliath of strange urges that brought men to seek women, women to seek men, humans of all kinds to embrace one another? What if David had brought to Goliath the gentleness of a finger tracing a line on the back of a partner who moves closer and closer? Of course, that would be boring, and the Philistines and the Jews and both their peoples would have vanished from the face of the earth, leaving behind a few marks worn into rocks and rivers full of small disappointments. As it is, we are prepared for tears even before the enemy appears on the horizon. Even after thousands of years have passed, a remembering nation has drawers and closets stacked to the ceiling with slingshots, because who knows when Goliath will walk the earth again.
Okay, so
Oh,
first of all, this is not easy reading.
not at all.
Okay, let's start with that. It's a political piece, and it's
Yes.
clear to everyone. And I'm going to just ask you, how do you, if we had read this 3 or 4 years ago, would we have read it differently than we're reading it today?
Yes. Yes, definitely. Today we're stuck again.
So first of all, read it. As you were reading it, and you could see also I underlined certain things. What was your feeling? I actually feeling about it.
I know, yeah, I think if I'd read it pre-October 7th, I would have been a lot more open to her message and sympathetic of don't demonize the enemy. If as Rabin said, you can only make peace with the enemy. You don't make peace with your friends. But after October 7th, and just watching the negotiations to bring home the hostages, you have to say, sometimes they're just, there's so much against you that there's no one to talk to.
Okay. I was actually feeling, and that's why I wanted to know, what did you actually feel? I mean, viscerally, as you were listening to it. I mean, did any of you feel like, I don't want to put words into your mouths, did any of you feel angry with her? No?
I think it was a plea for peace or to attempt to make peace, but that's no longer where we are now. But at the time she wrote it, there was hope. And what she wrote at that time made sense.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to insult the
more because other events have changed our views.
I don't want to insult the people living in the United States on the call, but Americans have the tendency to view what's happening in the Middle East by the rules that govern engagements in the US and in Europe, and the Middle East is a totally different ballpark that doesn't play by the same sets of rules. And if you don't understand that, you'll never understand what's happening in the Middle East, and that you can't necessarily approach it the same way.
I think everyone in this group understands that, right? But you're saying there's some truth, and it's also what I was, as we were reading it, I was thinking to myself of Kumbaya. Remember Kumbaya, right? I don't know, when does that go back to the 70s? I was 60s. I don't know.
Yeah.
Even, yeah,
Even more.
Right. What was the message? Right? What was the message of Kumbaya?
Everybody get together, be peaceful, live together, you know.
Right, right.
Which unfortunately, I mean, I was not angry, but I was sorrowful. It can't be. It's sad that it can't be. And that's the emotion I had reading that. It was
Right.
like, yeah, he had a mother, he was a human, it's a human being, but when they're, you know,
okay. Now
it's difficult.
Okay, let's give to her credit, or if you want, I don't know if we should call it credit, but wait, let me just share screen again. If we look at the very last, very last, right? When she says this, all right? Because when she says, who knows when Goliath will walk the earth again, she is being realistic here, right? In other words, she is saying it's terrible, right? It's terrible that we can't, be friends and sit down and tell each other stories. But she says that we have to be on guard, and so what she's saying, it's sort of too bad that we have the victim mentality that and we should never really forget it, really, that when people very often accused Israel of being so mired down in the Holocaust that we didn't understand that we have strength. But now things have been reversed, right, to a certain degree. And everyone is having trouble, I think, with our self-image to a certain degree. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not. Anyway, just to leave this discussion and go to something really totally distasteful.
Ooh.
a jigsaw puzzle.
Okay. This is a very well-known picture of Caravaggio, all right? David with the head of Goliath. But if you notice, it's a puzzle, right? It's a jigsaw puzzle. And you could buy it, I don't know if you still can, but you could buy it for $39. If any of you are looking for a gift to bring to somebody for the Seder, you could buy this. I'm joking, obviously. But, if you want something totally tasteless, all right? Imagine bringing this to a kid to, great art. Okay, now, since we were talking about, she was talking about mothers, right? There are some, outlier, if we want to imagine some of the mothers in the Bible, for instance, Cain's mother, or Lot's daughter's mother, who we've talked about. We haven't really talked that much about Eve to a certain degree, but we have talked about Lot's daughter's mother. Ishmael's mother, we've talked a lot about. Esau's mother, who's Esau's mother? Rebecca, right? We've talked about her. We've also talked about Samson's mother. We'll come to Sisera's mother in a minute. Sisera is the mother of, Sisera is the mother of Sisera. And then there's Samuel's mother, who we've talked about, or we'll talk about, Hannah. And then there's also the mother in Proverbs. And this is the word that Malcolm Gladwell uses very often, of outliers, right? Women.
Outliers.
Outliers, thank you. Outliers. Wait, what does he mean? Does it have anything to do with lying? No. They lie outside, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Outliers, thank you. It's today somebody corrected my Hebrew, and now someone's correcting my English. It's okay. No, I laugh at myself because there are words I never use. I'm sure this happens to all of you. There are words you know, and then when you use them for the first time, you're not exactly sure how to pronounce them. So I underlined Sisera's mother because there's a picture here of Sisera's mother. Now, Sisera is the mother also of a monster, right? And so there's this picture, the very well-known picture of her. Her name is actually called Teruah, like Tekiah, Teruah, right? Like you say on Rosh Hashanah with one of the sounds. And in the Midrash, right? It's a Midrash that's in the Talmud, in Rosh Hashanah 33b, you have here the idea that she is It's a day of Yivava. That's also one of the sounds. There's Truah. Wait, there's Truah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Shvarim.
Right, Shvarim is ba 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 ba, right? That's ba ba ba. That's the Yivava. It sounds like crying, right? And so it says, because it says, through the window she looked forth and wailed by Te Abev, right, the mother of Sisera. So the artist gave her the name of Truah, sister's mother, but he probably got that from the Midrash. So here's another picture of them looking through the windows, wondering why is the chariot taking so long. So if you want to put, Goliath's mother into the position, why, where is my son? What's happening to him? In other words, to humanize, all right? But it turns out that Sisera's mother is comforting herself, right? On the one hand, she's longing for a child who's never coming back from war, right? But this is what the artist says. But she says what it really ends up being is a piece about a greedy woman who was more concerned with the spoils of war her son had promised than her son himself. And basically what she says, oh, he must be busy despoiling women and gathering all sorts of loot. And there's a play on words there of Racham Tayim. In other words, he's probably raping women, and treating them as wombs. So this is a performance that was called in the time of the judges, and this was what the artist had to say about that. I'm not sure who Rabbi Eliyahu Kitov is, but in the book of our heritage, and I don't remember where I got this from, I apologize. Would you like to read this, Sus Ferris? When a mother...
Sure.
I'll read it.
Go ahead.
Oh, when a mother laments over her son's anguish, she experiences compassion for other mothers who likewise weep over their children's death, he writes. Sisera's mother, however, is different. She seeks consolation in a strange hope. Are they not finding? Are they not dividing the spoil? A maiden, 2 maidens to each man? Her son Sisera is presently inflicting death agonies upon Jewish captives and shattering the limbs of their infants. Such thoughts seem to assuage her grief. Can there be greater cruelty? Let 100 shofar sounds of compassion nullify every one of those outcries of brutality, except one. For even the most brutal of mothers is not devoid of mother's compassion. This one lament of compassion the shofar does not seek to nullify.
Really very strong.
Wow.
Very, very strong. Yeah, very strong. And then we have a poem by Chaim Guri, which was translated by Stanley Hyatt, who Marcia's not here, is she? I don't think so. Who she's told us on occasions that she knows Stanley Hyatt. And so she really has here the whole idea of at the end of Deborah's song, which is that the silence was not broken by horses, right? But that the land knew peace for 40 years, right? 40 years, there were no horses galloping, no dead horsemen started staring glassily, but her death came soon after her sons. In other words, so that Sisera's chariot, that's how it starts, is so long in coming. And he imagines her captured in the window with the silver streak in her hair, with a whole, with a whole description here. And very, very interesting how this is described. And the Hebrew is beautiful, but we're not going to look at the Hebrew. But those of you who want to look for it, you could look for it. I think it's called Shoshanat Luchot. I think, I'm not sure. I have it written down here. And then finally, we have here if you want to look at the defamation of Orpah, I think I have a separate section on Orpah, which we might look at, but not today, of course, another time. And we might want to look at that. So I'm going to stop here. There's nothing wrong with stopping early. Wait a minute, I have to stop sharing, first of all. Would anyone like to comment in addition, because we still have time, we have another 9 minutes. Would anyone like to comment on anything? Feel free. Stevie wrote, it's a sling, not a slingshot. Okay. Okay. What did you write here? Pursuit of Happiness made into the movie. Another with Will Smith by Anne Roiphe. Yeah, she wrote that. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, interesting. Okay. So, yes, Toby, that was a hand raised, I assume. No. Would anyone like to? I already stopped this. Did I stop it? Or am I still recording?
You're still recording.
You're still recording.
Stop.